Hey guys, welcome to The Called Entrepreneur, a podcast dedicated to those faithful men and women who are stepping out and making the transition from employee to entrepreneur. Our objective is to offer biblical wisdom, guidance, and even encouragement on that transition. The focus of building a business while also building the kingdom. So whether it's people going through their entrepreneurial highs, the lows, and everything in between, we want to help you. You may be a brand new business owner, a seasoned vet, or maybe somebody here just to grow and get better and improve their skill sets in growing a Matthew 6:33 business. Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all things will be provided to you. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump into it. I'm excited today. We've got a special guest, Landon Lambert, who's a close friend of mine, met for many years. And Landon is an incredible husband, his amazing wife, Emily. He's got a beautiful baby girl, Izzy, and a new baby boy, Brady. How old?
He's 4 weeks,
Yeah,
maybe 5.
New baby boy, Brady. And Landon's an incredible family person, but a successful entrepreneur, has opened multiple businesses. We'll talk about that today. So Landon, before we jump into it, I want to hear your entrepreneur journey. But before doing that, take us back to where you're from, sort of your upbringing. Not even ask this, how does your upbringing impact, your life today?
Yeah. Well, first off, appreciate you letting me be on your show. Been excited to go through this. So I grew up in Austin, North Austin, Round Rock. My father worked for a car dealer, so he's a car salesman. He did that. He worked for Ford for over 30 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. They ended up splitting. And once they split, my mom ran a bridal store for maybe 6-7 years. And then after that, just had been in retail. So she's been like a store manager, running operations. I have 2 sisters. My oldest sister's 12 years older than me. My middle sister's 6 years older than me. So growing up, I was born in Midland. My parents had initially separated. My dad moved to Austin. Then my parents got back together, and we all moved to Austin. But pretty middle class, right? My father was pretty hard, so we didn't take a whole lot of vacations growing up. Played football. That was pretty much my outlet. Most of my childhood was just like playing sports. It was a good way for me to kind of disconnect, but maybe I always get the timeline a little confused. Maybe I'm like 8, 9, 10. Parents split for good. They had split a couple times before that, but they split for good. And during that time period was kind of fundamental time period of growing up and becoming a male.
Yeah.
And my dad really wasn't around during that time. So ended up, graduating high school. And shortly after that, I actually was caught shoplifting when I was 18 and was arrested. Did couple minor things for the court because I had never never had any problems legally or anything. And after that, I moved to Colorado. And when I moved to Colorado, I actually lived with my dad for like 2 or 3 years there.
And not to cut you off, would you say that was sort of a pivotal moment in your life, that decision after getting caught and then moving? Is that sort of a life-altering decision, I'm assuming?
Yeah, for sure. So not like, my up to that point, pretty... and this is before I was a Christian, not nominal Christian. So grew up in a household where it's like, hey, we go to church, but I never knew, like, if you asked me who Jesus was, I didn't know any of that stuff. Yeah. So there was a place called Speedy's Pizza, and it was in a shopping center, like a little L-shaped shopping mall. And it was probably the size of this room. And they were just spitting out pizzas. This would have been in the mid-90s. The thing catches fire, burned the whole little business center down, and our church was in the business center. So he never went back to church after that, right? So the reason I say that is, like, up to that point in my life, I was pretty angry, frustrated, maybe felt like I was got a bad hand dealt to me, didn't understand how to get through that. So once I got in trouble and I moved to Colorado and I lived with my dad, I felt like pretty trapped. But I would say that's a pretty pivotal moment. I thought my my relationship with him at that point would get, a lot better. And on his side, he probably thought it did. For me, I think it was like more of a letdown because I'm like, my dad really isn't who I thought he was, you know? And not to say anything bad about him, but my dad probably wouldn't, and he probably agree with you, right? He probably wasn't the best father, right? Like his whole energy was about, work. So when I went to live with him, it was all about like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to work.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't like, hey, let me teach you how to be a man. It's like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do this profession. So if you need something to fall back on.
And dude, I want to make sure we stay on track with the transition to entrepreneurship, but I do want to dig into that for a second because I see you, right? I see you raise your kids, and it feels very counter to what you've seen. I think you're a very intentional father, the way you speak to them, the way you love them. And so could you talk about how maybe, I'm assuming that's an intentional decision. You go, this is what I knew. I want different for my kids. Are there certain things you say, this is certain steps I take to be the father I'm supposed to be?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for the compliment. I think that, I think how this ties into entrepreneurship is you have to understand where you've come from before you can really understand how to move forward. And the reason a lot of us can't figure out the next step is because we lack identity. So my identity was really fractured at that time, Man, the easiest way to figure out how to fast track is, a lot of people say mentors, which is 100% true. You need good mentors. But man, the reason you get mentors is so you can learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So like, I just saw a lot of the ways not to raise kids because I go, man, my mom and dad did this, or man, when we were growing up, we did this, and it didn't make me feel good.
Yeah.
And I don't, obviously, like, feeling good is not the best thing, but you want your kids to be happy, joyful, love you, want to have a relationship with you. So a lot of times, like with my daughter, she's 2, but I'm always thinking like, how does this make her feel? Man, am I being a good father in this instance? So I'm just always really intentional in terms of, I don't want to treat her or my son or my wife, the same way that maybe I saw my parents do it. And one of the things that I've been kind of going through lately is I've been thinking about like, so I think the highest form of leadership is being a servant, right? Serving others.
Absolutely.
Jesus like served others. I think the highest form of love is forgiveness, right? You talk about like loving people. Well, forgiveness is a very selfless act.
Yeah.
And man, my parents tried to do the best job they could. Like, they probably didn't get good direction, or the direction they got, maybe it was like fumbled or mishandled. So I don't want to, say my parents were really terrible. They probably weren't great parents. They were trying to do the best job they could with what they had.
Yeah.
But man, they're trying to figure their stuff out, and it kind of fractured our path, which led me to, doing what we all do because we lack direction. So you get direction from somewhere. So what did I do? I went, I'm supposed to go to college. Then I'm going to college, and you kind of get a feeling, you're like, man, I'm kind of doing this, but I don't really feel like I should be doing this. And then people are telling me to take out loans. Man, I don't even know what I really want to do, but now I'm $10,000 in debt. Oh, dang, now I'm $20,000 in debt.
Yeah.
Right? So then you fast track 4 years, and you're like, man, this college thing isn't really the direction I want to go. Well, then what's the next step? Well, you're supposed to go get a job. Man, I just don't really feel good about that. But that's what everybody's telling me to do. So you go get a job, and it's like, you look 10 years later, and you're like, okay, I went to college, I had a job.
You've taken steps you don't even necessarily agree with.
Man,
it's just because what you're supposed to do.
100%. Now you're further in life, and you're like, man, this isn't where I want to be. But most of the time, people accelerate those decisions, and you're in a situation where you can't get out of. I was just lucky enough to be like, oh, man, if I don't make a pivot now, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. I want to find out more about your transition, but I've got to back up because stuff you're saying, Lando, is so good. Talking about just say it again, the highest form of love.
Highest form of love, I believe, is forgiveness. Right? Like, man, when Christ died on the cross, he died for us, right?
Last words, right? One of someone's last words, forgive them, they know what not to do. So
yeah.
I read a book recently called The Bait of Satan, and it talks about, as Christians, we will face situations where we hold on to offenses. And it really gives scriptural backing to so many people are stuck and not where they want to be in life because of the offensive they held on to. And so I just think it's such a high level of really high level of communication regarding leadership when you're saying about the form of forgiveness. And so I want to, again, applaud you on that, man. Let's go back to our transition, because most people, if again, entrepreneurs maybe watching this or new entrepreneurs are looking to take that step to becoming an entrepreneur. Some people are put in that position out of desperation. Hey, well, this has not worked out. I can't find a job, and maybe a door opens and you pursue entrepreneurship. That was not you. You had created and been part of a successful corporate career. You were a young guy making six figures and had success in that world. Probably in every sense could say you could keep your career for 40 years, have a nice pension, 401k, and, live the American dream, right? But that's not what you chose. You chose to leave that life to pursue entrepreneurship. So could you talk about that transition, about leaving the corporate world, the success you had to pursue entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So most things in life, I think, I could be wrong in kind of saying this, but are crutches, right? Like our phone, we get on Instagram, you scroll, right? And it's kind of like a mental crutch. I don't really want to be in reality, so I'm going to do this for a period of time. I'm going to do it for 20 minutes. It turns into 2 hours, right? It's not really fulfilling. Well, I believe the corporate world's kind of like that. I need a paycheck, so I go to this job and I kind of process some work, and I get a paycheck, and I go to this job, and it's kind of mind-numbing, but it was just enough money where I felt like, man, I was kind of making it, right? And it's no shade to anybody that's in the corporate world, because I think that certain personalities thrive very well there.
Yeah.
My personality type just didn't.
Yeah.
So I just realized the further in I got, the more dependent I had to be on. It was Microsoft and IBM is where I worked, right? And I just had a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. There was, just to backtrack for a second, when I'm maybe like 14, 15, I was doing DECA, and it's a marketing association for kids, and I did entrepreneurship. So you build like a 10-page business plan, you go, you pitch it to somebody, and you're trying to get a loan. It's all fake, right?
Yeah.
But like you're competing. So I went all the way to like nationals or internationals doing it, where you compete against like
that's incredible,
8 or 16 people, and they're like the best of the best, right? I didn't train to do it. I like built the business plan. I never trained. I was just gabbing my way through, just talking to the people and just kind of pitching them and selling them, because my dad was a car salesman. So I could just kind of listen to him, and I was just kind of wordsmithing my way through, and I'm like 14, 15. But I knew I always really wanted to be an entrepreneur from even that. And even before that, like I always worked, I was always trying to make money, So when I was in the corporate world, there was always something inside me where I was like, man, I want to own my own business. But the further in I got, the less likely that was going to happen, because I was more dependent on the paycheck. So I had written down some goals that I wanted to accomplish. I was praying through those during that time. And, man, I just came to a point where I was like, if I don't do this now, it'll never happen.
Yeah.
And it's the scariest thing I had ever done to that point. But I was fast forwarding my life and going, man, if I try to leave in 5 years and I have kids, mortgage, car payments, debt, this, that, I'm like, man, there's no way I could do it then. So I might as well just take a chance now and figure out if it works out. And if it doesn't, I'll just go back to the corporate world, right?
Yeah.
So,
one thing I remember from our early days, Lando, is you were always very clear about what you wanted. One of our first, if not the first conversation we ever had, you went through your goals. You said, I want to have so much passive income. And so could you talk about that, how that impacted your transition of like knowing, hey, this is where I want. I can't get where I'm at now. I've got to make that transition to pursue the things I want to achieve.
Yeah, I had written out 5 goals. It was to be fully devoted to God, to be a good husband, to be in good shape, to make $10,000 a month passively, and have $100,000 saved in cash. And man, I look back and I'm like, what small goals, right?
Right.
But that's what I wanted. I was like, man, if I could just make the $10,000 and do it passively and not have to go to IBM every day, that was like everything for me. But man, I think the further along I get in my own journey, the less I realize it's about materials. And those are kind of like the first few things, like being fully devoted to God, husband. But man, like those last couple goals are just material wise.
Yeah.
And once you get some of your things that you want, I felt almost less fulfilled, because it's like you get to that point, you get a couple things, you're like, man, what's next?
Yeah.
You know,
you've got to make that transition from success to significance.
100%.
Right.
It's a great way to put it. I love that. But yeah, I think that purpose is a really, really big thing. And I know that I always wanted to help people. And that was really, even though those were kind of the goals I had written down, I think deep down in my heart, there was kind of two things. One was I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't have to be dependent on somebody, that I was a determining factor.
Yeah.
And the other thing was I knew that I really, really wanted to help people. And I think a lot of people say they want to help people, but their actions don't really follow that. You know, it's like, man, I want to help people, but I'm not available to do it right now. I got this going on over here.
Yeah.
But then they go to church on Sunday and they're like, yeah, I'm like, man, my focus is to help people. And then they go through the rest of their week and nobody gets help.
Yeah.
And then they look up and it's 10 years later, you know, that's not what I wanted. So I think at the core, it was like, man, I wanted to prove to myself I could do something. And on the other hand, I wanted to really be able to impact people. I think those were kind of the two long-term visions, but I never wrote them down.
Yeah.
It was more of a heart thing, you know?
That's incredible.
I think sometimes we write it on paper and it's in our brain, but it doesn't
You got to
translate
get
to
it.
our
That's
heart,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
Great point. So we've got a new listener listening to this episode, and they're going, that's what I want. I want purpose. I want significance. I want to do the things that he's talking about. And they have the courage to take that first step, right? And they move in the world of entrepreneurship. What advice, maybe you received at some point in your transition, or just something you've learned, what advice would you give to a new up-and-coming entrepreneur?
yeah, it's good. I guess I have a couple things. You know, sequence matters. Sequence really matters in life. I don't, do my hair, then hop in the shower. I hop in the shower, then I do my hair, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Or like I don't, before I go to bed, I don't brush my teeth, then drink coffee.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sequencing matters in life, right? So there's obviously a sequence of things that I have to do to find success, and that could be different for everybody. But with that sequencing, I could see what my long-term goal is. So like I could have a really clear, concise picture of what I want, right? And then I could work myself backwards to figure out what those steps that I need to take to end up getting to my end goal. So I think if I'm talking to somebody who's kind of starting out and they think that they know and they want to do something, my main kind of advice would be, man, you have to have that long-term vision, and then you have to figure out the sequence of events to get what you want, right? Now, for me, even though we're talking about goals and this and that, man, it's hard to know what you want. Like even for me, I'm stuck in the corporate world in these handcuffs for a long period of time because you don't know what you want. So if I don't know what I want, I think the question becomes, how do I figure out what I want?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
You mentioned earlier your purpose. That's what I was going to ask. Like, how do you get that? How do you find your purpose? How do you find out what you want? I mean, what's that look like?
I think self-discovery is a very important key role in entrepreneurship in general. And I think it's a key role that gets missed, right? Like, you get exposed as an entrepreneur. So if you don't work on yourself, you're not an entrepreneur. You go back to a job, or you figure out another way to go do things, right? Because it's like a microscope. If I have one tiny issue, that compounds over time. So I have to fix the issues. Most of the issues are issues that I have personally, right? So I have to learn it's a self-discovery. I have to learn what drives me, right? Because what drives you might not be the same thing that drives me.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, right? But as a human, as an individual, our purposes are different, right? God engineered us in different ways. Man, what a beautiful thing. Because if everybody was Landon Lambert, this would be a tough world. So.
Nah, that's good. So let me ask this. I know one thing I've watched in your journey is your faith is very important to you. You have people that are Christians, and you have Christ followers. People have a deep walk, and again, I want to commend you because I've seen you have a deep walk. First off, if you're open, would you share I'd love to hear your testimony, but also how has faith played a critical part in your business, if it has played a part in your business? How has that played?
It's great. Yeah. So the short version of my story is I was dating her for 5 years. Thought I was going to marry her. We end up splitting up. We were kind of living together, and come home one day, cleared all of her stuff out, left the key. We never talked again. I texted her, "Hey, what's going on? I don't want to do this." We never talked again. So I kind of go through like a phase where I'm partying, hanging out. I go to downtown Dallas, meet another girl, and I'm never really thinking it's like a long-term thing. I'm just trying to have fun. I end up finding out she has a husband, and I'm like, that is the cardinal sin of sins for me, right? Because my father was unfaithful. And I just like, man, if I'm even involved, like, it was just a personal thing. I felt I never wanted to get involved with any of that. And she had lied to me. I didn't know. So she lies to me about that. And I remember like getting down on my knees, praying to God on my own. And I go to the church, and I signed up for a Bible study, go to the Bible study. And they gave me a piece of paper. Piece of paper asked 2 questions, 1 to 10. How confident are you you're going to go to heaven? Mark through it. I'm not going to answer that, right? I know that, it's one or the other. Didn't like the psychological games they were playing with me with that piece of paper.
I like the fact that you said, I just marked through it.
I literally just scratched through it. So then the next question was, when you get to heaven, what are you going to tell God, right? So very Calvinistic questions there, which I didn't know at the time. So I'm like, oh, okay. We'll find out after the class, right? So I turned the sheet in, and I had no intentions of going back. My whole thought process was, in Nabil Qureshi, who has now passed, but he was a Muslim that ended up becoming a Christian, talks about, his thought process was, if I ran a red light, I need to run 2 green lights. So as long as I just do more good than bad. So in my brain, I'm like, man, I did like something really, really bad. I just need to pad the stats and do a whole bunch of good stuff.
Yeah.
The guy calls me back. We meet. I wanted him to leave me alone. Like, gosh, this church guy. So I'm like, I'm going to give him everything. All my problems. I'm going to lay it all on him. So we meet. I lay it all, down. Hey, here's what's going on, this and that. There's this girl. There's this other girl. And he's like, man, do you know who Jesus is? And I couldn't tell him. Didn't know. Knew he was a biblical character. Had no clue he's the Son of God. He died for our sins. I didn't know any of that stuff. And he's asking me some questions, and I'm just like, clearly I don't know this, And it was a process for me, man. It was probably about a year. I, read some books, read my Bible. I was with another girl by that point, because I'm like, hindsight's 2020. I'm like searching for something, right? Well, what I'm searching for is in girls and trying to meet different people. And so I remember praying. I'm like, man, if I'm not supposed to be with this girl, I asked you to like remove her from my life. I'm like praying that at my coffee table. And like 2 seconds later, she's in the other room. She walks in. She's like, I don't think that we should be together. And I'm like, cool. She didn't have a car. I'm like, cool. I'll drop you off at your house. She like packed her stuff up. And so then I go back to the church I was at, and she's like on the stage. She's not a Christian, but she got paid to like play a gig there. And it was a very odd thing, but it was just like, man, God was divinely working through that. And it was a process for me. That's how I gave my life to Christ. So, and then what was it? Was it how it impacted me?
Because again,
in entrepreneurship.
You've got a very deep walk, and I think it's something I've seen you go and grab onto in your trials and the world of entrepreneurship. So how has that impacted your business? Yeah,
so that was like starting line. Boom. So that happens and my life like really drastically starts changing. So if you like know me or knew me prior to that, like pretty crazy. I'm pretty, I really don't care what people think now, right? But like, if you know me now and then you go, dang, he didn't care what people thought back then. Like, I really didn't care back then, right? Like, zero filter. But I think that kind of, because that was the starting point of me asking questions. Because God is open to us growing our faith through not knowing.
Absolutely.
And he's okay with us. And I didn't really know that.
Yeah.
So when I was like, man, it's okay for me to ask questions, my whole life became asking questions. How does this work? How does that operate? How do I do that? Why do we do it that way?
Wow.
How does that affect me? How would it affect other people? I could actually open the door for that. And that ended up really taking me to the next level of going, okay, well, why am I here? Why is this the place I'm at in my life? Why would I want to go move this direction? If I want, like, man, when I get to 60, what do I want my life to look like? Man, this person that works at IBM, I don't want their life. Oh, man, this guy works 90 hours. Don't want his life. Oh, this guy's had 4 divorces.
Wow.
Don't want. So I think that it helped me in terms of, entrepreneurship today. I think it helps me develop other people because I can, if people are open to it, because the individual has to be open, right? If people are open, I can help them see where they're going and help them course correct.
Wow.
And I think that is because my direction in my life was, man, it was not good, right? I kept moving that way. It was going to be really not good. So for me to be able to really God course correct me, right? I think as entrepreneurs and leaders, you can't be an entrepreneur and not help people.
Yeah.
Time out. Let me rephrase that because you can. I think to do anything worthwhile and anything purposeful, you have to help people. And as entrepreneurs, if you're making an impact and you're doing it in a way that's going to help people, right, you have to grow some leadership abilities. And those leadership abilities have to be able to help people go from point A to point B. And if you can't do that and you're not adding value to their life, people are not going to follow you,
yeah.
right? Or they'll only follow you for a short period of time until they realize, like, oh, the value's not here.
Yeah. Well, on that note of growing leadership, serving people, and even just your spiritual foundation, if we point to the Bible, we take the Word of God and say, okay, what are some stories or maybe a certain parable that's jumped out to you that has had an impact on your life that maybe you run to sometimes? What comes to mind?
I like John 5. I like, is it John 15 also? You're the vine, I'm the
branches, yeah.
Yeah. John 5 is where Jesus is talking to I think they call it the lame man or the paralyzed guy. Yep. He's been at the pool for like 30-something years, and he's on a mat, can't get up, and he's kind of like self-loathing. He's like, man, these are my problems. And Jesus walks up to him like, hey, what's going on? He's like, well, I can't get in. If somebody would just help me. But man, every time I try to, and he's kind of like playing the victim role, right? And Jesus is like, commands him, hey,
get up.
Yeah, pick your mat up, walk. So he ends up walking, and everybody's like astonished, and Jesus vanishes. And later in that scripture, Jesus reappears to him because they're asking him, who did this? What happened? Who did this? And he's like, hey, if you don't stop sinning, bad things are going to happen. I mean, I'm being like very, I don't have the word perfectly memorized. And man, me and my friend talked about that, and he was like, man, Jesus follows up with us. And I just think that like through my whole life, God was always there. Yeah. I just didn't really realize it, you know? And I don't think God ever really leaves us. And that little parable or that story kind of shows like, man, he is really there for you. He's on your team. He wants to help you. There's like so many little principles and just in that of like how we're thinking about ourselves, right? Like the guy that is sitting there and he's like, I can't get up and I can't because other people, and it's me. And Jesus like, dude, you need to man, I'm reading that scripture thousands of years later and it's having a profound impact on my life. But the guy that it's about was like, man, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get up there, and that's never, that story's never talked about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really impact me. It doesn't impact any of the listeners.
Yeah.
So like, man, it's not about us. How Jesus helps us, how he follows up with us. Man, I just think that there's so many good little principles in that story that I've personally always really realized, or really not realized, but always liked.
Landon, it's interesting to bring that up. And we'll start wrapping the episode up here, but I've got to tell you something that I actually thought about you. A couple weeks ago, I was reading, and a big part of my journey this new year has been like, hey, Lord, I want to understand how to have a compassionate heart without magnifying the struggles of where I'm at or where I'm going. And so the example is like, I was raised, I've got an incredible family, and this, like, you almost don't show hurt, right? And the problem with showing hurt, it can almost, I didn't learn this from my family, I've just taken this over the years. The problem with showing hurt, it almost shows you don't believe what's coming. If I dwell on my certain moment, I'm not being positive enough to know, hey, I'm going to come out of this season. Are you with me? And so my question was, Lord, how do I have a compassionate heart for people, but also not show them I believe they're going to stay there. I want them to be stuck on this idea of that you're going to come out of it, but I want to meet them in that moment, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so I'm reading in the book of John, and reading the story of Lazarus, and it was eye-opening to me, Landon, as I read the book of the story of Lazarus, and again, the story where they call Jesus back, hey, Lazarus has passed away, and Jesus says, I'll come in a few days, 3 or 4 days, whatever it may be. And it was eye-opening to me, Landon, is when I read the story, Jesus eventually goes back to meet Mary, and they're talking, and Lazarus is gone, you didn't come in time, and Jesus knows he's going to raise Lazarus, but it says he wept with him. And I struggle with that. I remember reading that story and going, this doesn't make sense to me. Jesus, why are you crying? Why are you weeping with these people when you know you're going to raise Lazarus very quickly? And it made me realize the Lord has such a compassionate heart for his people. Even though he knows the outcome, it's not a bad thing to step in that moment with him. Yeah. And I said it because when I read this, I actually thought you came to my mind, because I think one of your strengths is you have the ability to cast vision, to move people. Probably one of your entrepreneurial gifts is to move people, but also be in the moment and be compassionate with them at that time. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's a leadership ability to meet people where they're at, love them well, be compassionate, empathize, hurt with them, but also keep them focused on, hey, it's going to be okay. It's good. Makes sense. And so I just want to tell you that's something I think that you exude, man.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
In that world. So, hey, listen, I'm grateful for you. I love you. I will always end with this because I think it's the most important thing. You're a gifted businessman, but an incredible father, incredible husband, and you have a spiritual walk in these areas. There's so much I've got so much admiration for you, man. So I really appreciate that. Love you, bro. Appreciate you. Thanks for joining us today. As always, my boy. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Called Entrepreneur, a podcast dedicated to helping faithful men and women make the transition from employee to entrepreneur while keeping a Matthew 6:33 mindset. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your story and connect with you. Follow us at Instagram, summit_HQ. Send us your story and forward this episode to someone that may need the encouragement that hopefully you received today. Come back to us next time as we learn to seek the kingdom as we build businesses.